Okay, so the format this morning is we'll have a short set of slides just about community, how it works, what's changed in the last year, and maybe what could be better for the next year. Then we'll go over to a set of slides about the long-term support releases and the stable releases. And then we'll try to have at least about 20 minutes of discussion at the end. We'll put back up one of the slides with some of the points on it. And it's just really to see what we can do better as a community and what we'd like to improve on. So let's see if this works. So Subtrees, which you saw, each component has a maintainer. So something like the Polmo drivers or the test PMD, those things. There's 109 unique maintainers, 8 subtrees, and 3 draft subtrees as of the last release. And the repos are hosted on dpdk.org, and they're mirrored into GitHub. We've got 4 releases a year. Within those, we have like 3 release periods of proposal deadline, which we also sometimes refer to as the V1 deadline. The integration deadline or the merge deadline is about a month later, and then that last period of a month is for testing and recycling of the patches. It means that if we have 4 releases a year plus 3 kind of monthly segments of those, we basically have a deadline once a month, which is quite a lot for developers, for project managers, etc. Here's a look at how the subtrees and maintainers go. At the top, we have this man here, Thomas on the master, and Ferru as the B is a backup, which is something new, and I'll come to that in a minute. Under that, we have the subtrees of crypto, event dev, NextNet, which is probably the biggest one, Next Pipeline, and NextQS, which are smaller. NextNet has NextVert.io, which is Maxime, who's here as the maintainer, NextIntel, NextMelanox, and then there's a few other vendor ones there. So they're quite the busy parts of the system. So what changes have we had since last year? So we have made some progress. We have these backup maintainers. So now, for instance, on the previous one, Pablo is the next crypto maintainer, but Akil, who was talking yesterday, was the backup maintainer. Pablo has taken a 3-month sabbatical, and Akil was able to step in and take over for him. And when Pablo comes back, there can be some sharing between them because they'll both be experienced in there. And Ferru and Tama work very closely together as well. So that's been good. We have a weekly project status update meeting. It's on Thursday mornings at 9:30 Dublin time. We have a lot of people on that call. It's not very suitable for the US time zones, but it does kind of match up with China and most of Europe. So we get a good mix there. The purpose of that is to look at the status of the subtrees, look at the schedule. Sort of, it's kind of like a project planning type of meeting, one where we can get feedback from the maintainers to say, there's issues here with the trees, or just flag things like issues with latest version of the GCC. They're working reasonably effective. It's 30-minute slot. We keep it to that. I send out minutes generally, unless I don't. So we have bug tracking and Bugzilla. I think this had was kind of just out of the release last year. So that's working, and that's actually quite good because it allows us to tie the release notes to defects. So if we have a known issue, we can tie it back to a Bugzilla instance in the documentation, and then hopefully when that known issue gets closed, the linkage people can fall back to the linkage. Regular weekly merge into subtrees and the main trees. We've done that in the last 2 releases. I think we've tried at least. It's been reasonably successful. Well, it's early days, but it's a good idea. The intention is that rather than having that merge, the 1 month between proposal or the V1 and merge integration, we'd have other merges in the meantime, which would allow us to test, run Converity and do those type of things. Auto accept of patches without objection. So this is if a patch is on the list in time, meets the V1 deadline, is sitting around, doesn't get reviews
for 3 weeks.
For 3 weeks, then it should get merged automatically. If there's an objection or a call for changes, then that needs to be done. If there's a NAC, clearly it can't go in. But it's to encourage people to get out there and review things, or else you know, these things will go in. And also for people who put patches up and nobody is directly interested enough to review, it's not kind of fair to them to come along at the last minute and say, hey, look, we've just reviewed this on the last day, and there's these 3 minor things that, you know, that they could have changed easily enough if they had more value. So, Open Lab, I won't go into that too much because we'll have some discussions right after this on that. That's good. And a new security mailing list, which is kicking off? Ish. Okay. Okay. So expect to hear more about security in a minute. There was one other one as well. I was sitting in the audience yesterday. I said, "Oh yeah, that's something else." Anything that's off the list that we did in the last year? There's one other one. He'll come to me afterwards. Okay. So we just have 3 slides here on this. What can we, as the community goes, what do we do to improve? Per, do you want to take some of these?
Yeah,
Yep.
why not? These are the things mostly we talk about when we are, as an Intel, submitting our features. So this is just to share with the community and get more feedback. For some of them, we don't have an answer, or perhaps some of them doesn't need to improve. But these are just ideas to share. And the end of this talk, we are planning to have a quick discussion, perhaps, to get more feedback. It won't be possible to get a solution right now, right here, because time is so short. But just share the ideas, at least, that we thought put on the screen. One of them is predictability of a patch feature. When does anyone in the community send a patch, it is not easy to know if it will make the release or not. If there are some technical issues, that's clear. It won't make the release because that needs to be resolved. But sometimes there are missing reviews, or sometimes feature is too big to deal with. So what should we do when that's the case? Sometimes there is less interest. Again, that leads having less release. Perhaps should we have some kind of design review, select some set of features, 3 of them, 5 of them, and focus and target them to the release? Does it make sense? I don't know. And that the idea is how we can improve. What will be the fate of a feature that has been submitted? Can we be more deterministic there? Second one is for complex features, mostly. One of the examples recently we have is hot plug, perhaps. It is not quite clear in community level what the requirement is. There are different entities have different requirements, but in high level, it is hard to get that requirement. So, and we are not doing a community level design. I don't know if we should, but that's what it is today.
And just on that, on those Thursday morning calls, I often offer a slot for somebody who wants to do a design review to have a similar meeting that I'll set up, and we can have kind of a community review on a topic, because we get very good discussions at this event, and it'd be good to have those, you know, during the year as well. So that offer is still open if people have something such as hotplug or something, a similar big feature that they want to discuss. We can have, you know, an hour of a call set up, and people can discuss that.
Thank you. Next one, deadlines. We are not bad at hitting release deadlines. That's mostly, at least we didn't miss the month part. That release delays sometimes a week or so, but we have also some delays time to time in the interim milestones. So that sometimes may mean the trade-off between more feature or timely release. So I'm observing sometimes people prefer to have some delay but to get features in. But what should our, is community okay if we are more strict in deadlines? You guys will get angry if we say, no, you sent 1 day late for V1, does not make it. Or we should be more flexible, but that will mean we will miss some deadlines. Another thing, release cycle. If it is too short or long, I'm not saying any of them, but there is one thing John mentioned. As a developer, you just finish developing one thing, and the next deadline just appears in a few weeks later. So that this continues. Should we give some longer breaks? But that have much other effects, being not aligned with other downstream consumers, etc. So just a debate, an idea. And right now we split it almost 1 month for each phase. Should we redistribute them? Do we need any that kind of thing? Roadmaps. That is kind of tied with planning to release and focus on some features. Mostly we don't know what vendors are working until V1 deadline. It's mostly the last week we learn, because in the deadline week, or if it is not last date, last week we learn about features, so it makes almost impossible to plan anything as a project manner. Intel is, I think, mostly good at sharing roadmaps. It will be better to get more roadmaps in advance from other vendors. I don't know how can we get more, but yeah. And
maybe to add, usually we start developing a feature one release cycle before the one it will be integrated. It means if we want to better collaborate, we need to get the roadmap 6 months in advance, ideally.
I think it would also be fair to say that most people working in most companies are working on plans. They know what they're going to be doing in the next 3 to 6 months. So, you know, there's probably things that people don't necessarily want out there, but for a lot of other things, it's better to get them out there and share them so that somebody else who's working on IPsec, somebody else who's working on a feature like that, knows about it and can collaborate.
It happened more than once in the past. I think when a vendor said, I'm working on it, another vendor said, me too, but not in advance. So, but how to get more transparent. Next item, the Open Lab was in the talk of last year also, but this year it is active now. There's a dashboard, so everyone can go and see the performance regressions, and there will be a talk about that one. But how to utilize it better, how to add more vendors to it. Right now there are some vendors already, but yeah, how to better utilize that one. Any comments? Welcome. That is more internal debate, perhaps the last one is, but it will affect users as well. Right now, I will go quick. We are doing Git rebase, which gives a flat, nice Git history, but we are losing data when we resolve conflict. So instead, we can use Git merge, which will prevent us losing data, but the Git history will be more messy. So that's a trade-off again. We should measure more. We are not able to measure our process much, so that doesn't give us more ability to improve. So how can we improve our measurements overall? We are using Patchwork tool, for example. Can we add some timestamping or linking to previous versions kind of features to Patchwork so that we can get some state change informations and metrics from Patchwork? Or as a generic question, how can we improve our overall process measurement? And last one is quality. We would like to keep high quality. And for example, it has been mentioned a few times during these talks, unit test. Will you guys get angry if we reject your patch because it doesn't have a unit test? Or is it better? So I think we need more unit tests. We have documentation, but documentation is kind of thing, it seems you can always improve it. So should we be more strict about those kind of things? Should we be more strict or more relaxed on coding conventions? Perhaps we should be more relaxed there, I don't know. But always we need more reviews. and we need automated testing. But ideas are welcome. Please share your comments, and yeah, here as well. That's the overall summary of the list.
And we'll come back to this at the very
Come
end.
back to this after LTS talk.
One thing that I skipped over slightly on the slides was Patchwork, on the improvements in the last year, and I think that's improved a lot. We have the whole series report. There's that new tool, Git PW, for working with Patchwork. It really makes working with series or big patch sets a lot easier. And really, I think that was driven by the DPDK community. It's Stephen Finucane does the coding behind the scenes, but I think it's really, he's working on a lot of feature requests that are coming out of DPDK to improve that.
Yes, we're working with him a lot, and we plan to push more features, like Ferru said, for measurements. We need to push more features. So, yeah, some DPDK contributor on stage with Patchwork.
Yeah. If anybody hasn't tried it, the documentation is really excellent. You can just pick it up very easily.
For Git PW.
For Git PW, yeah.
And it integrates like a proper Git extension as well, sort of using the Git config.
You want to go first?
No, that's your one.
Right. So the current status of LTS Release is that we have 16.11.8, 17.11.4 just came out, and just last night we had 18.05.1 from Christian, who couldn't be here. And these are the current branches. Now 18.05 is EOL, and 16.11 will be end of life in November, so we'll have one more release, and 17.11 will be maintained until next year. I maintain 16.11, and Kevin will be doing 18.11 starting from February next year. And so there you can see a timeline.
Yeah, I suppose one key thing is that it's a one LTS and then 3 kind of non-LTS releases. That's the kind of cycle.
And one question that we have that has been asked quite a lot, and maybe we can leave for the discussion, is do we still need the stable release, the 18.05.1, 18.08.1, the non-LTS ones? Is anybody here using it? Are any customers using it? We don't have much insight in that, so we would like some data and some opinions and some experience from everybody here.
Okay, so I just did some stats on the different stable and LTS releases. So this would be like the one to the x-axis is really the dot release of each. There was a CVE release, as was mentioned yesterday, that I just merged into the previous one as it was very small. But this is the general picture. So if you look at the one on the x-axis, you can see all these releases have had at least one stable release. And that's the amount of commits that have been per release. So there's a few things, if you look at the one on the x-axis, is that we see over time that generally the amount of commits in the initial stable release has increased over time, which probably makes sense in terms of maybe there's more awareness of getting the right tags on the patches to indicate that they're fixes, and also maybe the fact that the code base is growing. There's obviously an enormous spike on 18.02. So I tried to look in to try and figure out what that was, and
So we were looking at that yesterday.
Yeah.
I was saying, who did that release? I mean, it's crazy. It's double the amount of commit. Who was the maintainer? And it turns out it was me. And my explanation for that is that it was just after 18.05, which was massive as well. So as a consequence, we had much more commits that were tagged as stable and fixes as well. So that's why that release is bigger.
yeah, another thing, I think in 18.02 there was a lot of changes to some of the drivers. There were some new drivers added, but I have another slide later on just about where the changes are, and it wasn't particularly unusual. So it seemed to be kind of across the board, which indicated it was, as Lucas says, just that there was so much volume of changes kind of after it. Maybe there was a lot of testing, a lot of bugs were found, and it needs to be backported. I suppose the other key point here is that when you go on the x-axis beyond 1, we see that all those stable releases don't have a release. Whereas the 2 LTSs continue to be released. I suppose that's just a key point for anybody who wants to try and use DPDK in production is to just to have the awareness of that. There is a stable release, but we can see from the graph that there still is a lot of bug fixes that come in over time. And if you're talking about 16.11, we're talking about almost 2 years, and there's still 50 plus bug fixes coming in. I have another graph on just comparing the two LTSs, but I suppose the key point here is that there still is bug fixes, they still come in beyond the stable release. So that might be a consideration for people. So this is just comparing the actual two, it's the same graph really, but just comparing the two LTSs. So if you look at 17.11, I think that's what everyone would expect to see, is that there's a lot of bugs at the start and it tends to ramp down. So that's kind of, I think, not what we'd expect. For the 16.11, I think maybe there's been some changes in policies about what kind of bugs get backported.
Around 16.11.4, we changed slightly, and we became more inclusive of backports, and so that's why it's going up a little, and now it's coming down again.
Yeah, and I mean, there's a question on the next slide, but it's like, what is a bug? What should be backported? Is a bug anything that goes into master that says fix, or should it be selective? Is a performance improvement a bug? Is it documentation? Is that a bug worth backporting? Okay. In terms of the areas that have been changed, you can see for both 16.11 and 17.11, and I looked at 18.02 as well because I was looking at it for the other thing. They're quite similar in terms of the vast majority of changes of fixes are around the drivers. So I mean, I don't know, there's a few ways you could interpret that. I mean, it's probably a good thing. I think that the core libraries, don't have huge amount of changes from release to release. There's some anomalies with the test and the, go ahead.
Can I comment? Yeah, it is good that core libraries has less, but I think this is also proportional to lines of code in the repo.
Yes, that's true.
Sure. Okay. Yeah, so that would actually probably be a good one to compare to lines of code and also maybe changes within that happened in that release. There's some things like test and the bus wasn't in.
So the test is a new subdirectory that arrived after 16.11. So in 16.11, the tests are inside apps. So that's why there's this discrepancy between the two. But more or less, number of commits is more or less the same when you add them up.
But so maybe one explanation is just lines of code. I think it's good that the core libraries aren't changing too much. Even some of that would be vhost related, which you could argue it's another I/O which is very actively used. I suppose the only question I'd say is there's so much changes in drivers.net. Does that indicate that vendors should be trying to test more, for the initial release, that there's a lot of bugs being found afterwards? I don't know. It's an open question.
I think more it is used, more it is tested, more we find bugs, and more you will have backport. So I expect to have a lot of more commits for crypto dev, compress dev, event dev, and later for IPsec stuff and all other stuff like that. You will have more. Be prepared.
Okay. Right, so we wanted to give a quick overview of the process we use because we realize many people ask what gets backported, right? So the way we do it right now is that we rely on every developer and maintainer to tag the commit with cc stable@dpdk.org and or a fixes line with the commit ID. So if you do one of those things or both, then we flag the patch for backporting. At that point, we look at the fixes line, and if the commit that introduced the bug was in the LTS we're working on, then we backport the patch. So please make sure that if you are sending a patch and you think it's a bug or a performance improvement and you think it should be included in stable in the LTSs, please tag it with cc stable@dpdk.org. And the maintainers know this, and they do a very good job in trying to tell people to do this when they don't. But we need the whole community to help us with that. In terms of when things get backported and when we push to the DPDK stable branch, in the past we've done pushes in batches when Thomas tags an RC candidate. At that point, we look at the tag, and we pixel the commit and filter them, like I just said, and then push them to the branch. We are trying to see if we can do, like on the master branch, to do more merges and more pushes as the release goes on, to let people have more time to review and look at the code. In terms of the release process, you might have seen the spam of email you get from me, Christian, Ian Serok, and the others. So after we have a list of commits, we send it to the mailing list, to stable@tbk.org, and CC in the developers, one patch per email saying, we have identified this patch. If you're fine with this, then we are going to push it in 3 days. So you get the whole list on the stable mailing list. And we have a few days for review. Afterwards, we push to the branch, rinse and repeat until the final release on master is tagged. At that point, we have started now from August to do an RC1 tag, because we got as a feedback from testers that it was much easier for them to get a tarball with a tag on it, and so that they have a known point to test. And then we leave 10 days for everybody to do the testing, and we wait for feedback. So this is one of the 2 key points that I want everybody to take home. First, we need help from all the companies, everybody who has products, everybody who has users. Please help us test these LTS releases, because we cannot find bugs if you don't help us. Intel does a great job, Mellanox helps us as well, Red Hat and SUSE have been doing a bit of testing as well, AT&T does for 1611, but we would really like more people to help us with this.
And it will be especially important for the next release 1811, because it is an LTS1, so we want to be sure that it's very well tested in a lot of diverse environments.
So the way this works is that we will send a final review email to dev@dpdk.org, saying in 10 days we're going to release, this is the RC1, please help us test. And you can just reply to that email saying, we've tested it, it's all good, or we've tested it, we found some bugs, like I had to delay 1611.8 for 10 days or so, because Intel found a few regressions, and that was good, we fixed them, so now the quality is higher. So please help us with that.
Yeah. It's a very easy sell as well, because any testing, that your quality department does now and finds in upstream is probably a bug that you'd find in 3 months or 6 months' time when it's gone into the product or whatever. So yeah. It's really an advantage for everybody to do it.
Hey, Luca, sorry, just a quick question in the process. Do you audit the patches that are tagged to stable@dpdk.org, and do you filter out? Is it always the case that you'll always apply those patches that have been CC'd to stable, or how does that work? Do you make a determination there?
So we look at the Git tree, right, and we filter out every commit that does not have either a fixes or a CC to stable. So all those that have either of them get selected, and then we do a quick review saying, okay, this one adds an API breakage, so we are not going to backport that.
Okay.
Right? The second key point, and this is very important, as I said before, when we select these patches, and we do some testing, like testing that it builds and it runs with test PMD, but then we send the email saying, patch foo has been selected for backporting to 1611, and we send it to the list and to the developers that send it and to the maintainers. We really need you guys to look at that, and if you think your patch should not be in a LTS release, please tell us. If the email will contain the patch as it is applied and backported. For 1611, it's now 2 years old, so very often, like half of these commits, I have to change them a bit because they don't apply, because of merge conflict, because of a log macro has changed slightly, or a function name has changed, or context has moved. So in the email, you will see the patch as I have applied it. So we need you guys to review it. And this is new from the next set of work we will do starting in November. You will also see a diff of diff. So it will be the diff of your original patch to the one we backported it. So we really need you guys to look at that, and if you see something that doesn't quite look right, flag it to us. Because we operate on no objections means it goes in, right? So we don't always have much insight on whether all developers look at it and review things. And we want to keep doing this no objections means gets in, because otherwise it doesn't scale well. And I know a few developers have come back and said, okay, no, don't back for that one, or no, you need to change this thing. And that's fantastic, but we need everyone to do that.
Can I add a comment, quick one? That RC was a good idea. Otherwise, it was hard to follow from the mail your patch, but right now you can get the Git repo and just the thing. And about what gets backported, just a quick note. What you mentioned for the commits already in the master, but also users can backport their,
yes.
Please.
Absolutely, yes. So if you are a developer and you know that there is something you want to be fixed in the 1611, but it doesn't go in master because maybe the code has changed completely and you cannot send it anymore, then you can just send the patch directly to stable@dpdk.org, and please use the git send email options subject prefix saying which branch you're targeting it to, so like patch 1611 or patch 1711, and we will look at it and apply it directly there. And maybe something for discussion is, as I said, we rely on the tags on the commits that go in master. We do not look at other commits, right? Because we just don't have the time to do that. Should we do something more? That's an open question, I think.
Yeah, I think we just move into the general discussion on both, and if we can get slide 8 of the first ones back up just on it. But so we'll take open questions or suggestions around the LTS process. And just before we get into that, thanks very much to Luca and to Christian and
Young Seok is doing 1711, and thanks also to Yunans who did the 1711 and 1611 before. So yeah. And
this is great work, and also to the system test people who spend a lot of time testing these releases as well. So, okay, so we have these ones. We have also questions coming out of the LTS ones, like for instance, if stable is actually required or not. There was some historical reason to have stable there, where people needed a hot fix and stuff. We could still potentially do that without having it. We could do ad hoc stables as necessary for CVEs or something like that, without just generating extra work. So anyway, these are the topics for discussion, so we'll get the mics going around, and anybody who needs to ask. Or else we'll start asking each other questions.
So perhaps we can start with the stable release. Does anybody use the non-LTS stable release in here? Yeah, there's a few, okay.
Do you want to say why you use it, maybe, and why it's useful?
So usually when the LTS release is available, we use it, but sometimes we require to have the latest drivers. So for instance, now we are currently using 1808, and we will switch to 1811 when available.
Historically, one of the reasons for having it was actually for Open vSwitch, that when they weren't on the LTS releases, there was fixes, because they would pick something like 1605, and then fixes would come in, but they wouldn't be available to them again until they moved up. So that was the use case for having those stable releases.
But from my point of view, for real deployment in production, we should advise always to use an LTS version. But before going in production, you need to do a lot of testing, sometimes during 2 or 3 years. So during this time, probably you need to be on the cutting edge with the latest release, but with the fixes. That's why I think this minor stable release are useful. But do you have this experience yourself or with your customer? I don't know if you can share. It will be very interesting. It will be.
I mean, I would think, if a non-LTS comes out and there is bugs in it, okay, I mean, somebody can try and backport the bugs themselves, but otherwise they have no like possibility that they will get a release with those bugs backported. I'm much more in favor of LTS, but I could still see some use for some people maybe.
Same indeed. LTS can be old. Based on the timing of the release, someone may prefer newer release, but more stable one. Otherwise, you will go to 1 year previous release. So looks like can be useful, but yeah, it depends on if there's a real use.
So I'll play the devil's advocate on the other side here. So it doesn't come for free, right? The stable release. We need a maintainer. There's a lot of work. There's a lot of testing. It generally takes 3 to 4 days of testing for these LTS releases and stable releases. So it's not free. So if we are going to go forward with it, we need to make sure that there is value there, and we're not wasting people's time in maintainership and testing. Okay.
Maybe another question for everybody. Who uses the LTS releases in production here? There's a few more. So are you happy with the rate of fixes that you get, with the bug fixes? Has anybody had any problem with LTSs? I don't know, with 1611, which is very old, so maybe more buggy. Any comments on that? Nope.
Okay.
All good. We're doing a great job. So.
No, yes, you can comment.
One thing I'd like to touch on is the release cycle. As I said, these things, it's excellent having the predictability of the release cycle, and people know that if you don't get into this release, it's 3 months, and people can decide to intercept, 1808, 1811. But they do come around quite often. What's the feeling in the audience? Is the release cadence just right? Is it too big, too small? What's the Goldilocks measurement on this one?
I think we should have had this last night. After the pub last night, maybe. Yeah.
Okay, so we're doing everything right and everything is good.
There's a comment.
It's good for us. It's good for us. One thing to think about, though, is that if the LTS needs more testing, should we give more time to it? And what would be the solution then? But I don't have any clear answer for that.
Yeah, so we picked up 10 days delay to allow the testing to happen. If you are interested in helping us testing this, and 10 days is not enough from when we target the RC1 and when we release, please tell us. We can change it. It's just a number of days as we picked, and it was working for the testers that are currently working on it, but we can change that. Just let us know.
Another question I'd have is in terms of approaching the LTS, should there be any difference in the types of features that are accepted? Should development slow down a little? Like let's say a good example would be these memory changes. Would that want to be done just before an LTS? And you could make arguments both ways, that it's a feature that will maybe need fixes and it'll have 2 years, so that's fine. Or if this is going to be a stable release, let's not put a really big feature in, and maybe the 02 is a good time to get kind of new big features in and let them stabilize over the kind of the course of 3 releases before an LTS.
Yeah.
So John, just a bit of insight into some data. So we were looking at some data internally at over the past 8 DPDK releases, and the average, if you look at the committed release date on the website versus when it actually released, so on average we're about between 11 and 12 days late over the past 8 release cycles, just pure days, right? And in general, we hit our V1 merge deadline, most cases, where the big delay in the releases we're seeing is between when the merge deadline happens and when an RC1 comes out. And there's a correlation between the delay of the release on the far side to the duration it takes to get an RC1 out once the merge deadline has passed. And I'm just wondering if there's any thoughts on how we could improve that. Is it purely down to just lack of reviews? Because then obviously that has a knock-on effect on the V1 deadline for the next release.
Do you want to try?
Why is everybody looking at Connor?
Yes, we are late, mostly missing integration deadlines. And what
I'm speaking from a project manager standpoint here, so.
Well, what I don't like is this looks like for community it will always happen, and that hurts our liability on deadlines. So perhaps we should be more strict. That's one thing. But other thing, how can we make it on time? I don't know.
It's a priority call, right? So it's what are you prioritizing, scope or the schedule or the quality? So.
I can make a small comment. You know, it's very easy and very fast to apply patches when you are sure it's right and you already have a lot of command, especially from trusted people, saying this patch is fine. But if you are not sure, if nobody cares, or if everybody thinks it's fine but don't tell it, you have to check again, what is this patch exactly? And that's right now we have this rule that if nobody says something after 3 weeks, we will take it anyway.
Is that happening?
Yeah, it's especially useful to give a justification why it has been merged. But it's not ensuring you have a good quality.
No, it doesn't.
So what makes a release sleeping is when you have too many patches which are not sure or which deserve more reviews. So the quick answer is yes, we need more reviews. And sometimes reviews is not looking at all details and checking where we are missing a comma. No, sometimes it's just, yeah, this ID looks very good. We want it. And sometimes you miss something. There is a small bug in the patch, but it's not a big deal. We can fix it after RC1. But at least we need some confirmation that people are okay with the idea. So please use your email client and just reply, yes, go for it, +1, whatever.
Can I also raise another little point that I think we're improving on, but I still think we have more to do, as well as trying to get the reviews in, because the reviews are always a problem. But I think getting more regular commits across the release cycle is also important. The idea of the weekly merge and the pull from the subtrees, I think will be a big help there. But I think if we could see also maybe reduce time between you get that review or that ACK and then it getting applied, or smaller commits coming in a bit quicker so we get a more gradual flow, because just I haven't been sending in massive features or anything like that, but what I think I notice is that we tend to suddenly have, you know, nothing hitting the main tree for a couple of weeks, and then suddenly there's an absolute massive number of patches all goes in within a very small amount of time. And I suspect if we could find ways or policies or something that would help smooth that out, it might help our overall development process as well, and perhaps even encourage reviews, because if people want to see something get in and they know if they review it 2 weeks before the merge deadline, it's not going to sit there until the merge deadline to go in. It'll actually go in once they review it or once they ACK it. So maybe there might be advantages to trying to smooth that out, and you know, if there are suggestions as to how that could be done, it'd be great as well. But it's just an observation.
I agree that the regular merges, we also need them for continuous integration and performance tests. So they should be merged that we can see their effect. If they wait for last time, yeah, that's not helping, yes.
Yeah, but it's great to see it on the slides there, you know, regular pulls from the subtrees, and that'll just keep the main tree ticking over, and everybody gets to test the stuff that little bit sooner.
Not just the main tree. I think there's a knock-on effect to the LTS, because or the stable branches, because you know you don't want to be putting stuff on stable before it's on master, obviously. But if there is a regular merge, it means those stable branches, rather than having a lot of fixes towards the end of the cycle, at least the branch can be regularly updated with fixes, so people can pull from that. And of course, the validation would happen at release time, but I think it's a better model to have fixes kind of rolling into a stable branch, and the regular kind of merge enables that.
It also gives the developers more time to look at the patch that we backward and check if it's okay or if it should be changed or taken away. So that would be good as well.
Can we have a kind of credit system? The vendors, they are submitting patches, use their credit when they do review, gain credit. Yep, if you don't have enough credit, it's not merged.
Achievements also, maybe?
Yeah, why not?
Question here.
I have a slightly different topic, but back to what you were showing up earlier. Since so much of the DBK is drivers, and back to the previous discussion with the OVS things, we do not have a general test regression coverage suite for drivers or semantic expectation as in like a test that goes and does dev info, says, oh, you've got these flags, these are good flags, these are bad flags. Oh, you have this flag set, I should try calling this function in your driver. I'm not asking for, code coverage of all the paths of the driver, but just do a semantics test of the ethdev layer, which would then, you would get a bunch of coverage and the usability would be much better. And when we get a new driver, we could basically say, did you run this test? And that would, and even the LTS stuff, you could run it on a few things and be pretty sure that nothing broke. Because right now, we kind of leave it up to the vendors to do their own special things on their own special drivers, and we don't have anything general.
No, we don't have tests as visuals perhaps, but for the drivers especially, I don't know how to do it. I have Intel NICs and I can just call abstraction APIs and check the result, but how can I do for other drivers? There are now 26 physical driver in driver nets.
What I would do is I would probably say whoever's owning up to do it, and I'm not going to own up to do it, is go extract out of like OVS and VPP the code that they use to set up devices and make sure that it works for projects, and maybe in the same time you'll discover that those codes are doing completely weird things that happens to work only on
again,
Intel.
I don't have those hardware. Unless I do some mocking in...
No, but if the test was such that you ran it on a port and you could make sure that you guys made sure it works on Intel, and then you say, Mellanox, go run this thing, same thing on your hardware, and then, and when somebody comes in with the new...
common framework, everybody validates their own PMDs against it. Yeah.
It's good. I think we're just at the top of the hour, so I think we'll wrap it there, and thanks everyone.
Thank you.